people who are, coming for, psychiatric help, coming for psychotherapy help. And for them, their trauma is the defining feature of their life. And what part of real trauma work involves and includes helping people see that there is the thing that has happened to me, but actually the vast majority of how it is that I end up suffering in response to that is because of what I then do to myself.
Hey friend, I'm so grateful to see you today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, hopefully your favorite internet, maybe real life brain surgeon. And I am really honored to have a little bit of time with you because I want to tell you something today. I'm proud of you. You've been through something hard. You've been stuck for a long time. You've been feeling like you're settling for something in your life. You've gone through a massive thing of some sort, some trauma or tragedy. But you know what's different about you? Of all the people that have gone through something like that, you're not satisfied anymore. Just stay sad, sick, stressed, stuck, settling. You're ready to do something about it. That's why you're here. You're seeking answers. You're after it. You're looking out for the path forward for you. You've recognized that if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. So you're doing something about it, and I'm so proud. That's brave, friend. It's hard. It's hard work to get better. It's hard work to break through, to find that level that you know you're supposed to be on, to overcome that thing you've been through when other people seem to be stuck with it. So congratulations. Go you. I'm proud of you. And that's why today I am so excited to bring you this conversation you're about to hear. Have you ever had one of those moments when you met somebody for the first time, and from the very first second that you started talking to them, it was like an old friend in the room, like somebody that really saw you or heard you or felt you? Or you felt connected with them on some really deep level, not in a sort of strange way, but just that you just felt like this person was somebody that you could know or maybe had known for a long time. Well, this guest that we're going to have today, Dr. Curt Thompson, is an internationally acclaimed author. He's a psychiatrist. He's incredibly well known for his books, including his most recent book, The Deepest Place. And as you're going to hear us talk about, he's one of these guys that for about 2 years, every time I had a podcast interview, somebody else's show or mine, or I went to 700 Club or talked to Susie Larson or talked to Ann Boskamp or talked to somebody, they would say, gosh, you and Curt Thompson would really hit it off. You got to get to know Curt Thompson. You got to call Curt Thompson. You got to have him on your podcast. All these people, dozens of people wrote in, got to have Curt Thompson on your podcast. And well, we made it happen. So anyway, as you'll see in just a minute, from the very first second that we started talking, it was like we were in the middle of a conversation that we'd had some time before that had gotten interrupted somehow. We just immediately fell in with understanding that the work that we're both called to do is holy and it's important. And I'm just here to say that whatever you're going through, friend, Curt Thompson and I, this conversation is going to move the needle for you. And so, like I said before, I'm really proud of you that you're doing this work, that you're after this calling that God's had to say, hey, stop looking backwards and start looking forward. It's time to move to a new place. I've got something new for you. I have a plan for you. I have a promise for you. And it's time today to remember that you can't change your life until you change your mind. Dr. Curt Thompson is going to help us get it done. We're going to get after that conversation, friend, right now.
I mean, I've just heard from countless numbers of people who have been over some period of time been saying, do you know Lee Warren? Do you know Lee Warren?
No, it's the same for me. I everywhere I went, it seemed like every interview I did, every person I talked to said, "Hey, you got to know Curt Thompson. You got to get Curt Thompson on your show." So it's like we've been in this orbit. I'm glad we're getting together finally.
Just a quick story. I came very close to having a much more personal relationship with neurosurgery when I was a resident, and a series of events that led to an MRI that my neurologist was fairly convinced I had a right parietal AVM, and they were and I was like already kind of like they were already like lining me up for surgery for this. I was a, what was I? I was a second year resident. And, so we do the, cranial kind of angiography. They discovered that with the angiogram, I didn't have
an AVM.
I had this thing called a venous angioma, and it's, it was large enough that it looked like an AVM on the MRI.
Wow.
Our daughter, my wife was pregnant with our daughter, and they were giving me they were, being faithful. It was a little, you're just trying to breathe and like, well, I guess here we go.
Wow.
And this is what God has for us. And we'll just take the next step and keep moving. I had a great team at where was it in Philadelphia, Temple University Hospital. And so I was just very grateful. So I was just, I'm just aware of how grateful I am for the work that you do.
Thank you.
And, really, really, really grateful.
Wow. That's, it's really scary when we get news like that. When I was a second year neurosurgery resident, I went to get my eyes checked, and the ophthalmology resident said, "There's something funny about your corneas. I'm going to go get the attending." And the attending was this world famous neuro-ophthalmologist named Jack Kennerdale. And he said, "Oh, you've got Buick's dystrophy." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, you're going to need a corneal transplant in about 10 years. And I was like, "Holy smokes, I'm just starting out as a neurosurgeon. Like, what is that all about?" And it turned out to be a misdiagnosis. I'm, 30 years later, I'm still fine with what's like. I relate to your pain, man. Not on the life and death level, but I'm going to go blind without a corneal transplant, they said. So, like, wow, that's bad timing.
It just kind of just said so casually.
Yeah. Like, oh, Fuchs dystrophy. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, oh, corneal transplant or blindness in 15 years. It's like, oh, great.
Wow.
It's very humbling and, scary, but not life or death, but I relate on a small way.
Well, no, the news that you don't expect to get that has these potentially completely life-altering futures. If my mind goes down that road to think about it, and so it was, it was meaningful to have a community of believers around us, and there was a period of about 10 days where we're
just didn't know.
No, you don't know.
And I think that segues really nicely into what I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Suffering is my second book. I've seen the interview was about glioblastoma and how people handle the news that they're getting life or death diagnoses, and then we lost our son and all that at the end of that. And
Wait. I don't know that.
Oh, you don't know that part of my story? Yeah. Our son Mitch died in 2013. He was 19 years old. And the worst part about that is we really don't know what happened. There was a lot of mystery around the events. I wrote about that in my most recent book. And we just had to come to a place where we don't really know what happened to our son. We never will be able to know what really happened. So the police could never really figure it out. So that was part of my story of kind of coming to.
Okay. I'm just so sorry.
Thank you.
I'll never forget it wasn't Tolkien's actual words. It was Jackson's overlay in the movie where they had said no parent should have to bury their child.
Yeah.
And, wow. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spring that.
No, if I can be one more person with whom you can know that you're not walking with that alone, because it's kind of like, oh, I mean, that's not a thing that we ever get over.
That's right.
It's a thing we learn to live with, that we learn to suffer with.
That's right.
And dude, like the whole thing, of not knowing how it happened, like it is so hard for the human mind to not be able to bring closure in terms of making sense of events.
Yeah.
It is, it is really difficult to not end up coming back in a loop, to continually go back and try to figure out as a way to like, well, what, kind of ultimately, what can I do to prevent something like this in the future in some way, shape, or form with somebody else from me or whatever. It's just, it can be just a little short of maddening.
You're right. And for us, it was Lisa and I and our family, we had this really clear moment when Lisa and I said, my wife, we said, you know what? We're going to be those people that stand in front of the police station with the picket signs, like we demand answers, like forever.
Right.
Or we're going to have faith that God can still help us live and not know, because we're not going to know. Like there's just no knowing. And so
yeah.
when we got to
Like you're living Job's story.
That's it.
Right there.
Because he never gets why. He gets who. Like
No.
he gets that this is who God is and that's enough. That's got to be mine. And so that's right. That's exactly right.
Oh, I interrupted you. You were about to say.
No, that's exactly what I was saying. Like we just came to this very sort of crystallizing moment where we said, okay, our life can be about this thing that happened to us, or our life can be about, does God really mean it when he says, I'm going to refine you in this furnace of suffering, and it can define or it can refine, and that's just who we have to be. We have to be refined.
Yeah.
And because you can't, like there's no end to the suffering if your life is defined by the events that you went through.
Right.
There's just not.
That's really well said. And that's, it's funny that you say that, because you may be well aware. By the way, I'm just sorry that we don't have like 3 hours.
Me too. Yeah, we'll do it again.
I would love to do it again. I'm just aware, and as I said, you may be aware that there has become, and it's kind of making its way into the public consciousness at this point. This kind of phenomenon of, unfortunately, it tends to be kind of epidemiologically or demographically located more dominantly in a particular generational section, particular age range. But this notion of people who are coming for psychiatric help, coming for psychotherapy help, and for them, their trauma is the defining feature of their life. And what part of real trauma work involves and includes helping people see that there is the thing that has happened to me, but actually the vast majority of how it is that I end up suffering in response to that is because of what I then do to myself.
That's right.
And you're like just putting your finger right on it. Like I can decide that this is going to be the defining moment for me. And then I foment my own suffering.
That's right.
In a particular direction that's disintegrating, or I can choose to turn my attention in a different direction. And it does not alleviate my sadness. Always, it does not mean that at some point I get to the point where I no longer wish that my son were alive. But what it does do is that it keeps accusation, it keeps shame out of the room. It keeps me connected to others, and so that whole notion of refining, the end process of which I'm not able to predict. I have to only see it in my rearview mirror, but it makes it possible to happen. I mean, everything you're saying is just so. I mean, it's just so spot on and true to what we're seeing in the clinic about what we have to do with turning people's attention in terms of how they are in relationship with their trauma.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And I think the whole conversation around trauma and all of that goes down a very spiritual path. If you say, can this be the thing that finally helps me understand who God is, how he sees me, how I see him? And can this be the thing that actually gets me in a closer place in my life of where I was supposed to be? Because that's what happened to me. Like, I'm beyond this hard-charging neurosurgeon, Iraq War combat veteran, gone through the divorce and been this guy who, put my life back together and all this stuff, and then get remarried and we live a few years and everything seems to be going right and we're doing all the right things and God's smiling on us, and then our son dies, like boom. And I am not who I thought I was at that point. Like everything I thought was true in my life. That the subtitle of my second book was The Things We Think We Know. Like the stuff we thought we knew isn't what's going to hold you up when you find trouble, right? And it just my whole life changed, and it's like I'm going to either be this broken, sad, destroyed, bitter guy or drink myself to death or something, or I'm going to say, can God really keep all these promises that he made, and will he really be close to me as I'm brokenhearted, and can there be good coming out of this? And all those terrible things that people say to you at your son's funeral, they start quoting Romans 8:28 and all that stuff, and you want to punch somebody.
Oh gosh.
But then, then you start figuring out over time that those things are really true. It just shouldn't be said at the funeral, right? Right?
Right.
We're like brothers here. We're on the same page.
Dude, I just like, I just need to get a flight to Nebraska this afternoon.
Yeah.
You just coming to hang.
That's what Christopher Cook said. He said, you guys are going to be like brothers, like, from the moment you meet. Like, which, by the way, before we go any further, since we're 10 minutes into our conversation, Curt Thompson, internationally acclaimed psychotherapist, psychiatrist, best-selling author, podcaster, all the things. From Virginia, welcome to the show, Curt. Thank you.
Lee, thank you for inviting me. And as we were saying just a few moments ago, to your listeners, to our listeners, I'm grateful that we're getting the chance to meet virtually for the first time. I feel like I've known you for several years, given the number of people that have said to me, dude, like, you need to meet Lee. You need to meet Lee Warren. And in 10 minutes, 15 minutes of conversation, that notion of having a felt sense of looking at my brother in the eye is already happening, and which is it's a commentary on the work of the Spirit.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you. It's a joy to be with you.
Thank you. And we're going to talk about the super fun topic of suffering for that. So just so you know about the audience, I mean, my work as a neurosurgeon puts me in contact with a lot of people they get the diagnosis like you did. We're just sharing, you get a diagnosis that sounds really potentially terminal and terrifying. And for me, it often is that as I'm delivering that news to people. And your husband's got 6 months to live. Your kid didn't survive the fall off the bike. This terrible thing is now in your life, and I'm the guy delivering the news. So that has led to my writing and podcasting, where we explore all this stuff. So the audience that's listening today, Curt, from all over the place, are largely people who are in the midst of some of that stuff in real time in their life. So they're looking for answers. So they find this show, or they've been through that, lost a child, lost a spouse, gone through the bitter divorce. They didn't want something. So a lot of the people listening are going to be in that place, the deepest place, as you call it, of suffering. And so I thought, who better to have a conversation with than Curt and help us unpack some of those things. So well, let's talk about suffering today.
Yeah. It's in the book, and I know that you know this in your own writing work, your own professional work, that we anytime you want to talk about suffering, people want to listen to, like, oh my gosh, maybe they'll have the answer that will eliminate this.
That's right.
Oh, this is what I need to do. These are the 3 steps. And even the biblical narrative itself, one would think, gosh, I just wish Jesus had come like right after Adam and Eve had eaten the apple.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Why so long? Why wait? Why does Jesus have to wait so long? Why are we waiting still so long this notion of suffering is just part of what it means to be human, and I'm looking for a way to get rid of it. And yet, in the same way that we read in the second, there is that haunting, for me, that haunting line in the second chapter of Genesis. It's not good for the man to be alone. That, as we write it, even from an interpersonal neurobiological standpoint, the felt sense of being alone, in my view, is in many respects, give or take some neuropsychiatric conditions that have a more dominantly, perhaps somatically based origin. People with some versions of schizophrenia, some bipolar versions. There are other kinds of things that are primarily kind of neurologically grounded in that sense.
Yeah.
That in my experience, all anxiety is ultimately a feature of I have the felt sense that you're leaving me.
Yeah.
I'm anxious because shame is mediating this felt sense of abandonment. I'm not enough. I'm not okay. And as a result, like you're gonna discover what is true about me, and then you're gonna go. You're gonna leave.
Yeah. Like
right now, like I've already, like it would not be hard to imagine. Like we've been on this call for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I already have great affinity for you.
Yeah.
Which means there is a part of me that is already wondering, gosh, if we really got to know each other, live next door to each other, we live next door to each other, we might not get any work done because there would be just way too much things to do. But if we did, at some point, Lee's going to discover the thing about me in which he's going to say, no more. No more. So this notion of suffering, we would want to say, is, as it turns out, in the clinical literature and so forth, we talk about suffering. I mean, the Bible doesn't use it in these terms, but kind of we say, well, suffering is this way in which we respond to pain over time, right? There is the pain, the event that happens to me, this thing, I've lost my son. I've got the diagnosis of cancer. I've lost 3 brothers to cancer. And I mean, you just do this. And there's that news, that event, and then comes the response. And as you've said so eloquently, there is the response that we could have of continually working to try to figure out, how did this happen? Why did this happen? So that's one direction that I can turn. But then which is a direction that I often turn because I'm by myself and feeling powerless, so I got to do everything I can. Then there's the other question of, who is with me in this?
Right.
And so the whole, when in the deepest place where we write about the whole notion of suffering, we have to remember there's the famous verse 3 in Romans 5 that many of us might be familiar with. For suffering produces perseverance, produces character, produces hope, which does not put us to shame. But I have to remember that there's a run-up in Paul's words to that line. And the run-up is what we can see without going into a lot of detail here, is that Paul's really focusing on this felt sense that we are immersed in relationship with Jesus. And Jesus, in the same way that, why the life of the Trinity is so meaningful and helpful for us, this notion that even he says to his disciples, you will leave me alone, but I am not alone.
That's right.
For the Father is with me. And so I think, suffering largely has to do with my response to my pain in a sense in which I feel myself being by myself. It's not good for the man to be alone. Genesis 2:18, that haunting, it's not good for the man to be alone. And evil exploits this continually, trying to separate us from each other and from within ourselves and from God. And in so doing, I'm left alone with my pain.
Yes.
And I will tell you this, if somebody had to give me the news that you often have to give to people, I would want that somebody to be you. Because already in the short time we've been together, I'm aware that you're aware of what it means to have the felt sense of presence, of the significance of that. And that even though my presence doesn't change the fact that I've gotten a diagnosis that is not very pleasant, or the news that is not very pleasant, what is going to enable me to be present in my suffering is my being able to see your gaze finding mine. And that's going to be the thing I pay attention to over and over and over and over again, that eventually, over time, is the thing that allows me to begin to tell a different story about the painful event that I'm experiencing. Wow. This is the other thing that we say. We have this notion of isolation that evil will exploit. But the other thing is, we humans have, we tell stories like no other animal does. And as a result, I have an event that happens to me and I immediately start to tell a story about myself and about, the event and so forth and so on. And the question is, if I'm telling this story, do I notice that Jesus is sitting at my table when I'm telling this story? And if I look at him, will he ask me, I'm wondering if that's the story you think I'm telling? Wow. And so, we recognize that in order for us to navigate the world as human beings, now deer, squirrels, antelope don't do this. They're not aware that they're aware, as far as we know, like unless you're in a C.S. Lewis novel or something. Right, yeah. And so we are telling stories about these things. And this is also part and parcel of the suffering. If I tell a story in a certain way, just like Job was telling a story, his friends were telling a certain story. They were making sense of the events of his life in a particular way. And the gospel comes when Jesus says, hey, all y'all who are suffering, y'all come to me. And I'm going to help you tell a different version of your life. The circumstances may not actually change. Lazarus, he gets to die twice, right? It's like, ugh.
Right.
And yet we with the gospel have a savior, have a king who comes and says, I'm going to tell a different story about the world, about your community, and about you. And I'm going to use my community as my body to tell this story differently. Wow. And, that's why in your work, I see in your surgical work, you're telling a different story. You're telling a story of healing. Like, here's this trauma and we're going to go get it. We're going to run to it, right? Just like a MASH doctor, right? You're going to run to this.
Right.
This is what the gospel does. Jesus runs to the trauma. But you don't just leave it there. You say, we're going to tell a different story. And even if real time and space, the outcome isn't exactly what I want it to be, I then have a choice to tell a particular story, but will I have the people in my life who will enable me to tell that story differently than the one that I typically tell, that evil will want to tempt me to tell about my pain? And I'm just so grateful for all your work, because I think this is, I see you helping people tell their story differently in the middle of these horrific circumstances in which they find themselves.
And you're doing the same thing. I mean, the mind, the brain and the mind often don't know the difference between something that's happening just in between our ears or something that's happening
right
with the astrocytes in our brain. They don't know the difference between something real and something perceived. And so
right.
It's all so tied together. One thing you said, I don't want to go past it because it's so important, and you said it almost in passing, is one of our first reflexes with suffering is we want it to not be true. We want the event to not have happened. And I remember I was on the board of directors of a hospital in Wyoming when we lived there, and our hospital bought another hospital in town. And that caused a bunch of practices to get disrupted. And as you imagine, all the business for everybody changed a lot. And we had this board meeting where one of the heads of a group whose business got turned over a lot because of the new acquisition was furious at the CEO for this happening, right? And he's pounding on the table and he's demanding all these things. And she looked at him and she said, okay, the business deal is done. Okay, it's over. And we can do this for you, or we can do that for you, or we can change this, or we can change that. What is it that's going to make you happy? And he said, I want you to go back and undo it and make it like it was before. And she said, well, you can't have that. That's done. So what can we do now? And that reminded me of like what you said, like we can't have the fact that our son's still alive, the tumor didn't happen, the accident didn't occur. We can't have that. And so if we want to process and move forward from suffering, we have to accept some things that are unavailable to us as options on the healing menu, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that you know, our work in medicine, I think at least for me, I'm sure for you, kind of gives me like a fairly clear view, like even from a somatic standpoint, of how this unfolds. I mean, part of the thing, especially for people of faith who want to follow Jesus and who want to have right responses to things.
Yeah.
Part of my challenge, I'll just speak for myself. Part of my challenge is that when the suffering comes, there are certain things that I know to be true, like that you and I have been talking about. And so one of the challenges is that I can too quickly leapfrog over some of the initial necessary stages that are early in the process of suffering. So, the whole thing about, your one physician who, has a choice to make. And yet, at the same time, it would be necessary for somebody to give him the time and the space to pound his fist on the table.
That's right.
It's kind of like, oh, I got this diagnosis, or maybe even it's a diagnosis that I can do something about, right? I've got some kind of meningioma or something you can surgically remove, and it's not going to kill me. But like, it's going to disrupt things or whatever. And there is this initial like, oh, it's an inflammatory response time, and it's going to take me time for recovery and so forth and so on. Like it might be a long road out, but I might be able to get back to recovery. And that whole process as well is important. I'm just reminded yesterday we were in, we have these confessional communities that we run, and there was a person in one of these who's had a supremely tragic event that happened. This person is a person of faith, and they are really still real. And this happened months ago, and complicated story, but still really angry, but feeling really ashamed that they're angry.
Wow.
And, this is the whole, grief model of like, yeah, you're going to have a range of different things that we're going to go through. So that we this is the other thing too, that you have to be careful not to try to rush the suffering process.
That's right.
So that if I get the diagnosis, or if I discover that this or that or whatever, we have to be careful to not just too quickly check my anger at the door, as if, well, God doesn't want me to be angry. God wants me to change my perspective and move right along to the new thing that I need to do. And we say, when Jesus says, look, unless y'all change and become like little kids, like little children, like heaven's not going to work for you. And there are many features about being a child. And one of the things that children are completely guileless and unabashed about is that, like, when your 3-year-old feels like complaining, they're going to complain until they're done complaining.
That's right.
They're not thinking to themselves, I think I have 3 minutes to do this, so I'm going to make the best of it, but then I got to be done. Right?
Yeah.
You're not doing that. And so I think also for those of us who are in the middle of suffering, it is important for us to recognize, there are stages of this suffering and grief that we're going to go through that is important that we have the felt sense that others can hold that and can hold that for as long as it needs to be held, but who are not just holding it so that becomes the defining quality, they're holding it with a vision for my moving in a certain direction. And that takes discernment. For some people, that process takes a week. For others, it takes 6 months. It depends upon the nature. But there is always this sense that we are continually moving at a pace that God wants to take us in, that is moving us toward this state of healing and integration and that refinement, right? It can either, as you so well said, it either can define us or refine us. And so part of that process is just being aware that there is also a time gradient that's involved in that.
Well, speaking of time, let's go to the other end of it, because somebody's going to email me about this episode, Curt, and they're going to say, hey, this happened to me 20 years ago. and I still feel like it was yesterday, and I can't move on in my life. I don't know what to do. I address that person because that's a very real problem too. They never get past it.
Right. So I think there are a couple things that we would say. One of which is in some respects, right off the pages of the Psalter of the set of Psalms, and another which I think I would say is spoken to by some of the things that we've discovered in the last 15 or 20 years can be helpful from a kind of a psychotherapeutic integration standpoint. And the first thing off the Psalter, we'd say, like, why is it that we have 150 Psalms? Like, why don't just 5? Okay, maybe 10. Like, why do you need all of this affective expression, all this emotional stuff? And where, some estimates would be that fully a third of these are Psalms of lament.
That's right.
But these are Psalms that, we read them like, and I think I'm going to take this, the 60-second Psalm, and I'm going to wait for God. But these Psalms were not spoken typically individually. These were read collectively. These were read corporately. We are doing this together. And so the first question is, for many, when people will say this happened 20 years ago, and I would want to be asking, who are the people with whom you have walked and who have walked with you, who have invited you to drain the ocean, to put on the table? It's not just enough that I feel my rage and my sadness and my shame and so forth. It is, who else has heard this? It's not good for the man to be alone, because so for many people, my sense of like, I can't get over it has everything to do with the fact that I have been alone with this. Now, people might know about these events, but that's very different than sitting in a room with people by whom I'm going to be deeply known, who I am able to, have I gone out with somebody and I've just laid into a heavy bag with somebody watching and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs about how anguished I am about this? Am I willing to allow that much of me to be on full display? I don't mean in front of 1,000 people, but I mean in front of the 3 or 4 people by whom I'm going to be deeply known. That's saying it very quickly, and the process is not a long one, but that we find here, we think that if somebody knows about my story, that it's the same thing as my being known by those folks in my depths. One of Job's problems was that he had a bunch of friends who, they get to a point where they just can't take it anymore, and they have to open their mouths and start yapping at it.
That's right.
Right? We don't hear of a group of friends who come and say, this is really hard. We don't understand it either, but we're not leaving the room. We have nothing to say other than we don't know what's going on here. We know it might not be you. We don't know, but we're not leaving the room. And we're going to rage with you. We are going to anguish with you. And this is what, one wonders, what would have happened if immediately after eating the apple, had Adam just come out of the woods and said to God, I really screwed this up. I don't know what to do. I'm a mess. I don't know what to do. Can you imagine the Trinity coming? It's like, oh my gosh, look who we have here. So, like a guy, nonetheless, who's willing to take responsibility for his own anguish and the anguish that he's giving to other people. What would that be like? That's one thing. And then I would say, so this notion of by whom are we being deeply known? And it is a far too often overlooked element about how we find ourselves where we are 20 years after the fact, still being troubled by that. And evil, and this is the thing, evil does not want us to be aware that we need each other. Evil wants us, especially in our Western, particularly American, I'm going to pull myself up my own, but even in the church, right?
That's right.
I am on my own spiritual journey with Jesus. It's this siloed personal thing. Like this is not the biblical model. It's just not. The second thing I would say is that, perhaps you may be familiar with, an intervention that we call EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And in many respects, what this and other interventions like it are doing are really giving people the opportunity to bring parts of their experience together again that have been separated. And what I mean by that is when we get overwhelmed, I mean, you're a surgeon. I mean, over time, you would have to be trained to know how to separate the part of you that technically needs to be excellent and be able to come to the table and take care of the gunshot wound, come take care of whatever the trauma is that you're dealing with. You're going in for the glioblastoma. You have to be able to do that while keeping the part of you that might feel great anguish at the plight of the GI or the patient who is before you.
Right.
The thing is, we need to be able to do this in order to do that work. But if we keep those parts of us so separate eternally, it means our brain is going to end up working, because our brain is not meant to keep things separate like this forever. It wants to bring things back together. And if we carry a certain payload of affective, what we call an aliphatic load of stress, and we separate that in such a way that it's not connected and integrated to the rest of our neural network expression, prefrontal cortex, brainstem, so forth and so on, in the context of a community that is helping us do this, if we don't do that effectively, if something happened to me 20 years ago and I'm keeping all of that away from other parts of my functioning life, at some point my brain is going to say, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And it starts to come out sideways. And so people end up in our offices with panic disorders and depression and alcoholism and a whole range of other things. And it looks on the surface like, oh, my problem is alcoholism, my problem is panic disorder. It's not that they're not problematic, but what they're pointing to are these disconnected experiences that are represented by disconnected neural networks in the brain.
That's right.
And things like EMDR and other processes are ways in which, and these aren't things you just read about in a book. It's primarily in the context of another. It could be a therapist, it could be a pastor, it could be in these confessional communities where another embodied presence is providing the sustained place in terms of our felt visceral experience in which I can bring all of that frightening stuff back into the room and not be overwhelmed by it because I have support to help me do that.
That's right.
So that then the memory that I have eventually of this awful thing begins to take on a very, very different emotional tone. I can feel the sadness and not feel the shame. I can feel the sadness and not be overwhelmed by it, not because I somehow have magically done this by myself, but because I am now having the felt sense of experience that others are in the room. This is this is what all secure attachment development is all about. This is what happens when a newborn is upset, when a toddler is upset, and in the presence of parents who are going to be present with the toddler, but the toddler doesn't just get to do whatever they want. The parents have a vision for where we're going to go with this, but we're going to help the toddler sit with and contain all the overwhelm and then move them in a different direction. So that toddler, by the time they go off to preschool, they've had lots of experiences of distress and they become okay, not because distress has been eliminated, but because they learn to become resilient. They're being refined in the same way that, I mean, again, back to this, like you're going to be refined, not defined. I just love that those two words that you're using. And so to our person for whom this happened 20 years ago, I want to say, I can't tell you how hopeful I am. And if anguish is still where you find yourself, I want to say my guess is because you still haven't yet had the opportunity to be fully known in a context in which your anguish is brought into the room, in the presence of others who are going to be with you and not let you be overwhelmed by it so that you can learn how to reintegrate that. And we would say, oh my goodness, like this is the story of the gospel.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's interesting. You wrote The Deepest Place, which is about suffering and lands on hope. And my last book was called Hope is the First Dose. It's the same thing. It starts with losing a child, ends with how do we find our way back to hope. What's the rational basis or hope in a world in which suffering seems to be the clay from which we're molded? Like, what's the reasonable thought process that says it's okay and even the right thing to do to be hopeful, oriented towards hope?
Yeah, well, I think, the subtitle of the book is Suffering and the Formation of Hope.
Yeah.
Because I think from a rational standpoint, even just leaving faith out of it for a moment, if we talk about, when we use the word hope, we're using that as an expression of an anticipated future. Hope is a future state, and human beings, there's nothing that we do that is not an expression of hope. I'm going to stand up. You'll stand up. When you're done, you're going to walk to the door, and you're hoping that the floor holds. Well, we both know we're not thinking at all about the floor, but that functionally is what we're doing.
That's right.
You go to the surgical theater we anticipate that certain things are going to start to happen, right? The anesthesiology is going to do their thing. The nursing staff is going to do their thing. We hope. We are living into an anticipated future. But as we like to say, look, we remember our futures. I anticipate a future based on experiences that I have had that I encode in memory, from which I pull my anticipation of everything that's going to happen. One of the things that traumatic events do and that our suffering does is that it really messes with the way I anticipate my future. In that, if what I'm paying attention to is the thing that happened to me a year ago, and then 2 years ago it was, and now we're 20 years ago, I'm telling a particular story. I am encoding a particular memory that along with it has a certain emotional tone.
That's right.
Of grief and fear, and this then becomes my anticipated future. If I want to form hope, I have to interrupt my pattern of what it is that I do in the present moment. Even when I'm thinking about my past and the past event, I'm still doing that in the present moment, and I am solidifying the memory of and the neural circuitry that says your life is over. If I start to meet with you and you say to me, "Wow, this is really painful and difficult," and I'm being known by you, I start to have a very different experience of my remembered event. I'm saying this, and now I'm hearing someone say, "This is really hard. This is really painful," and I have the first, literally in my chest, felt glimpse of compassion, of empathy. And interestingly enough, not someone who looks to me like he also is being overwhelmed by that story. I don't know what's going on with that guy, but at least seems to be like he's with me, but he's not, the facial expression, the tone of voice, he seems to just be present. He's not being overwhelmed by the same thing that's overwhelming me. And what does this do? This literally gives me an experience in the present moment that is categorically different than the one that I've been having in the privacy of my own head.
Wow.
And what does that do? That turns on neural networks that are activating my oxytocin comes online for the very first time. I start to have very, very, it's knocking on my on my nucleus accumbens, and it's asking for things to come out into the brain that don't ever get the chance to come out into my experience. But then you say yeah, well, let's talk about this again tomorrow, and then again next week. And oddly, I start to create multiple present moment experiences in which I'm actually feeling and sensing something very different while I'm talking about the event. And as I do that, I'm actually over time creating a substrate of neural networks within my brain that are anticipating a very different future. They are now constructing an experience in which I know, I can talk about that thing and feel actually connected. I can feel hopeful. I have a very different thing. Well, what does that mean? That means I begin to form hope, not because hope is a thing that I try to make happen, but because it's actually being formed moment by moment by moment by moment. Notice there were some disciples who weren't even ready to believe even at the ascension of Jesus.
That's right.
right? I mean, Thomas hears that the disciples have seen him. In John 20, he's like, nope. Not until I have an episodic encounter that gives me the felt sense that my grief is being kind of absorbed by him.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're doing when you're sitting with patients. You're helping to carry their grief, and it changes the way they are literally experiencing themselves in this moment, which begins to gradually create the opportunity for them to anticipate a very different future. And this is why then we say, well, and hope does not put us to shame, does not leave us disconnected, untethered, separated, because the love of God has been poured out into our lives through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. And how does the Holy Spirit get to me? It gets to me through you.
That's right.
It gets to me through the gaze, through the tone of voice, through all of the time that we spend over and over again, in which I am anticipating, literally, because I'm developing different neural networks that help me have a very different way of anticipating the future. And, we say, look, the Holy Trinity has made human beings with the neural capacity built into it to be receptive to redemption. If only I'm willing to participate.
Amen. That's a sermon. It's a neuroscience lesson. It's a wellness refresher. I love all of it. I felt like we started this conversation, Curt, as if we were in the middle of it. Like we just walked into the room with each other, and it felt like I want to come lie down on your couch and tell you all my troubles. And
I want to come lie down on yours, and then I just want to walk into the theater and just stand on the side and watch you do your work.
I was gonna say, if you come into my room, I gotta cut your hair. It's a big mess. It's not as fun as you make it sound. So, hey, listen, we're gonna run out of time. I've got actually John Burke is coming to talk about near-death experiences in a few minutes. I've read some of his books, but he's great. I love John, but we got to do this again.
Right on.
Sometime in the future, I want to talk about. So you wrote Anatomy of the Soul 15 years ago, and I want to pick your brain about how you're thinking about mind and brain has evolved over those 15 years. Because if it's like me, like it's evolved a lot. Like we've learned so much about what mind is, what brain is, are not the same thing. All this, we've learned so much, and the hope that lies there is that you're not stuck with the brain that you have. You're constantly making a new one, and your mind is in charge of the process, and God's communicating with your mind. And there's just so much hope. So as we prepare to leave today, this conversation, address the person who just went through the thing, is going through the thing. And somebody said, hey, I know you're hurting. Listen to this podcast. It might help you in for it. And it's the first time they've been able to. Because for those first few weeks, you can't turn it on. You can't open a book. You can't just sit down. And now they're going to open this podcast. It's the first thing they've heard since they got the news that you buried their child or whatever. And the first voice they're going to hear is Curt Thompson. Like, address that person today, Curt.
Lee, I think the first thing I would say is, let me just say this, that the longer I do this work, the more Jesus weeping at Lazarus' tomb means to me.
Yeah.
And his being aware that this is just not the way it's supposed to be.
That's right.
Whatever's happened, it's not okay. It's not the way it's supposed to be, and I'm just so sorry. That's number one. And that would be number 1, number 7, number 27.
That's right.
I'm just so sorry. And number 2, I would want to say, you can weep and rage for as long as you need to. And I'm not leaving the room. We're not leaving the room. It's easy for us to be so overwhelmed that it's just difficult for us to imagine that anybody would be with us, let alone stay with us. Because at some point we're convinced that our grief is just going to, it's going to outrun your capacity to stay with me. Like, we're not leaving the room. Jesus is not leaving the room. Number 2. And number 3, I know that you have a hard time hoping. To which I would say, I completely get it. So I want you to let us hope for you while your hope catches up.
Wow.
And we're not in a rush. We don't have a deadline. We don't have a benchmark for you by when you have to be hopeful. Jesus took on these 12 plus members of his students. And even at the very end, he's like, how much longer do I have to be with you? Like he's exasperated. Like it takes them a long time. And he's okay with that.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, I'm not leaving the room. You are the ones that have been given to me. And I want to be with you and I want you to be with me, no matter how long it takes. And so we're not leaving the room. And that's why we can be hopeful. I want you to let us hope for you while your hope is learning to catch up.
Amen. Wow. Curt Thompson. Been a long time coming.
Lee Warren, brother. Oh, dude.
Mother.
This is just so good. Yeah.
So
Thank
good.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I look forward to another conversation, maybe hopefully face-to-face someday.
No.
We've got 3 copies of The Deepest Place to give away to listeners. I'll give you instructions after we let Curt go in a minute of how you can win one of those books. It's a game changer for your hope. Curt, the work you're doing is important. It's been helpful to me in my personal life and in my continued healing. And I just am so grateful for you, friend. Thank you.
Right back at you. Thank you so much. And thanks be to God. Yeah.
Amen. You see what I mean? I told you this was like an old friend stopped by. Like I bumped into somebody that I've known and loved for years. And I can tell you, Lord willing, Curt will be back on the show again in the future. I think we got a lot more to talk about. He's written several amazing books, but the one we talked about today, I cannot encourage you highly enough if you've been through something hard, especially. The Deepest Place, Suffering and the Formation of Hope. Curt Thompson is the man. In fact, in 2024, we had the honor of sharing Outreach Magazine's award for counseling and therapeutic resources for his book, The Deepest Place, and my book, Hope is the First Dose. We appeared as the co-winners of that award. And so ever since I heard that for the first time, I've really been pursuing this conversation that we had today. It took us a long time to get it done. Both very busy. We both have very different days of the week that work for us because he's still practicing psychiatry. I'm still practicing neurosurgery. So obviously it took a while to get it done, but aren't you glad that we did? I'm so grateful for Curt and the work that he's doing, for the way that he's helping people all over the world. And I hope and pray for you, friend, that this conversation touched some place in you that begins to crack open to the light, to the possibility of hope again. That you'll find some way to move forward, to grab some little nugget of what we've talked about here, or you read his book or read my book and find your way forward into becoming healthier and feeling better and being happier. I'm excited to announce that we have 3 copies of Curt's book, The Deepest Place, available. We're going to give away. If you'd be interested in a copy of that book, that life-changing book, send me an email, contact@drleewarren.com, contact@drleewarren.com. 48 hours after this episode goes live, we are going to give those books away. We're going to choose the winners. Lauren, who works for us, will be doing that. So be sure you give us your name, your mailing address, and your zip code. It has to be a U.S. address, and it can't be a P.O. box. Those are the only 2 stipulations the publisher gave us. Make sure you give us your name, your mailing address, and your zip code. No P.O. boxes. Has to be a U.S. address. I hope you can win one of those copies, friends. This book is a game changer. But even if you don't win it, if you can buy yourself a copy, go to the library and get a copy, you would be benefited by getting to know Curt Thompson and the contents of this incredible book on suffering and the formation of hope, The Deepest Place. I know it will be helpful to you, friend. I'm so grateful for you, friend. We're praying for you. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at drleewarren.substack.com. Go to my website, drleewarren.com. You get all the podcasts, newsletters, my books, all the stuff. Make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel or to the podcast wherever you listen. It really helps us out if you subscribe or if you leave a comment, a rating, a review. If you email us, contact@drleewarren.com. You can ask a question. I can send it on to Curt Thompson. If you got a question for him, we can help you work through some of this stuff. And I'm just so glad to have you on this journey with us because we're all after finding where God has us and finding a new way to tell the story of what we've been through so that we can have a new story going forward that'll help break those generational chains and help other people find hope and find meaning and purpose, even when it's hard, even when we feel stuck. There's a purpose for all this. And there's a way to form hope out of whatever clay life has brought you to start mashing together, to take the neuroscience and the faith and smash it all up with the circumstances you've been through, friend. And you'll start finding something that feels a little bit like hope. I'm Dr. Lee Warren. It's been great to be with you today. Remember, you can't change your life until you change your mind. And the very good news is you can start today.